Hello, I'm Aaron Heizer of Maker's Leather Supply, and today's project we're going to make something very simple and easy to make, but it can turn some scrap leather into a high-end project. And what we're going to be making is a simple leather cuff, a Bengal type cuff. Here's the one I've been wearing for about a year and a half now, and it's got a metal insert inside of it in between the layers of leather. So since it's all leather on the outside, it's extremely comfortable to wear. Since it's metal on the inside, it doesn't accidentally bend. And the best part is it doesn't need a snap or closure or anything like that. So let's get started. To build this project, we need very few tools. Ordinarily, I would hand stitch this project, but unfortunately, I don't have any stitching forks here in the studio with me, so I will be using a sewing machine. But please know that even the one I wear was hand stitched. I absolutely love hand stitching these. I love hand stitching anyway. So, very few tools. We need 2 pieces of leather that are about 8 inches long each. They can be anywhere from 4 ounces down to as thin as you want. They can be any kind of leather. I'm using 2 pieces of edge tan because I like the way it naturally patinas when being worn. You can use up exotic scraps on these and make some very, very nice things if you had a piece of alligator or something like that to make it out of. The other thing we need is this little piece of metal here. This is an actual bracelet blank I got from a local craft store. I think I got like 5 of them for 10 bucks. And so I can make 4 more after this one. As far as tools, you need a good blade for cutting. You're going to need a pair of wing dividers, and you'll need an edging tool of some sort to round your edges when we're done. And then you're going to need some contact cement and then some sort of a solution for slicking your edges. And that's about it. Besides the hand sewing supplies, that's all we're going to use on this little project. So the 2 pieces of leather we need to be at least a ½ an inch larger than the piece of metal on all sides. So here we are. If my piece of metal is centered on it, I've got more than a ½ an inch here, more than a ½ an inch here, and then also here on the ends, more than ½ an inch. And so now that we know both these pieces are going to be a great size for our project, I'm going to turn them both over and I'm going to get contact cement all over the back sides of them. So this is Barge contact cement. If you're working in an enclosed area, you may want to open a window. This stuff does have a lot of fume to it, and it can definitely make you feel better than you should be feeling while you do this. But I'm just going to take it and I'm going to slather it on both sides of my leather, being very careful not to let the leather move around, because if it moves around, it could get glue on from where the glue has been on the paper. It could spread the glue onto the finished side of my leather, and I don't want that. Now, contact cement works this way, where you have to put it on both sides of what you're gluing together, and then you have to let it set up for 5 to 10 minutes or so until it doesn't feel wet anymore. It'll feel a little bit more tacky, and then you stick those 2 sides together and it should be pretty much permanently affixed at that point. We will not put glue on the metal piece because we want it to slide a little bit freely inside there as we mold the leather to it and get everything stuck how it ought to be. So I've finished putting the contact cement on the leather, and now we're going to have to wait about 5 to 10 minutes for the contact cement to dry up and get tacky on us, and then we can continue putting this project together. Okay, so we've let this set up for about 10 minutes or so, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these 2 pieces of leather off of my little piece of cardboard that I had here, and I'll just get it out of the way, because once again, there's fresh glue on that, and I don't want that to get all over my project. And since we're not going to spread any more glue, I won't need it anymore. Okay, so the next step we have to do is take our piece of aluminum that we're putting in between the 2 layers, and we have to center it as best as we can on one of our 2 pieces of leather. Not difficult at all. Honestly, it doesn't have to be anything exacting. I just don't want to be so close to one of the edges that I can't get my stitch line and everything else that I'll need just right. Then I'm going to take my other piece of leather and I'm going to set it right over the top of it. And now the leather's not going to stick to the aluminum, but it will stick to the other leather. So I'm just going to take my fingers and run it around and try to find the edges of that aluminum as I stick everything together. Now, You can use almost any kind of tool for what I'm about to do next. Normally I would use like a bone folder or something like that, but I'm just going to use this stylus right here. And I'm going to take and press it right up against the aluminum and really make it to where you can see the outline of that piece of aluminum inside the leather. I want to create a very crisp outline because that's what I'm going to use to follow and make my sewing. Okay, now that I've done it with the rounded edge, I'm going to kind of do it with the pointy stylus edge and really get it up in there close. If you're using a leather that's a little bit more thick than what's recommended, then you could always get the leather a little bit damp, and that would help you with this molding process to get around that. It almost looks like it's embossed at this point with that piece in the middle there. And it is worth noting, I didn't bring it up before I stuck the metal in there, but a lot of these metal pieces are going to be stamped out. And when they're stamped out, one side of them is more rounded, where it's cut on the edges. One side will be more rounded, and then on the bottom side will be more flat. And if you can figure out which side is which, you should put the flat side down, and that will help with your molding process here. So there it is. I've got it about as good as I can get it. I want to make sure that my ends here are nice and rounded and even, and everything's stuck like it ought to be. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch this together real quick. And I just want to remind you, ordinarily I would hand sew this project, but I don't have my hand sewing materials with me today. So please don't feel like you can't do this project because you don't have a sewing machine. I actually kind of feel like I can't do it because I don't have my hand stitching supplies. So here we are at the sewing machine. This is a Cobra Class 18. It's a light to medium duty industrial sewing machine. I'm using size 138 thread and a size 22 needle in case this is something you're also trying to do. And then also I've got my stitch length down to where it's going to be about 8 stitches per inch, which is what I've got on this cuff that I'm wearing, and it's an appropriate stitch length and size for this project. I don't want to start sewing up here in the middle because that part will be obvious on top of a person's wrist when they're wearing this. So I'm going to start over here where it'll be kind of curved under the wrist a little bit because you can always see where that overstitch happened at the end of your stitch. Okay, and I don't need to back stitch because once again I'm going to overstitch it, which is that I'll go all the way around and then go back over my first couple of stitches again. So here we go. And I'm just keeping the edge of my presser foot right up against that line that I created working around the metal. And when I make my turns on my sewing machine, I want to make sure that I do all my turning motions while the needle is down in the leather, and that'll help me maintain a constant stitch length. And even though this was a relatively small piece of metal, once we're done with our stitch length and cutting out the edges and everything, this is going to be a little bit larger than we originally could have imagined with that narrow piece of metal. Okay, and here I am on the second end, and once again I'll make all my turning motions while the needle's down in the leather, and that'll help me maintain a consistent stitch length. Okay, so here we are coming to the very end, and I'm going to make sure that my needle goes back down into that very first hole, slightly raise my presser foot, just enough to take the pressure off, but not have the leather completely loose underneath. And then I just adjust the leather to where I need so that that needle will fall right into the next position it needs to be. There we go. I'll complete my last stitch and pull this out. Okay, so we finished stitching that up, and now we need to cut it out. So I'm gonna get me a cutting board, and I've got a pair of wing dividers here, and I want to cut it out about 1/8 of an inch wider than the stitch length is. So what I do with my wing dividers is I put them at an appropriate width so that they'll actually run up against the metal, because that's a lot easier to try to trace with my wing divider than it is to try to trace the actual stitch. So about right there, maybe a little bit bigger, I guess I got it too small. About right there, and we just trace it out, and we make sure that we're scribing a nice line right around our stitch here. My wing dividers, now that I've got them where I want them, they're about set to about 3/16 of an inch wide. I don't want a huge border out there, but I want enough that I'm not going to worry about accidentally cutting my thread when I do my edging and stuff like that. In the chance that you wanted to do some decorative stamping or something like that on this project, now would be the time to do it before we cut it out, just because of the idea that it's easier to manage and hold while you're stamping when it's a larger piece than after we've cut it out and it's become very small. So I would go ahead and do all of that stamping or whatever it is that you're wanting to do on it, tool on it, and then I would let it completely dry before I continued on and did my cutting. If you tried to do it to the naked leather before you put it down on the metal piece, then your chances of getting it centered on the metal piece are just slim to none. So now we're gonna start cutting this project out. And I've got tons of fancy leather knives, but here's my favorite one right here. It's a 9mm snap blade, just craft knife. You may already have one of these in a toolbox at home. They're very inexpensive, the blades are inexpensive, and my favorite part about it is once I've used a blade, I break it off and then I have a new sharp blade again. I don't have to sharpen this silly thing. And that's absolutely my favorite part of this tool. It's okay if I go to cut and I don't cut all the way through on the first go. Depending on how thick your leather is, maybe you'll cut all the way through or maybe you won't. But when I get down here to the end where I've got a very sharp curve that I'm gonna have to work around, I'm just gonna do a straight line cut, and we'll worry about that end in just a moment. I'll go back and recut that same line carefully and make sure I got all the way through the leather. There we go. Now I'll come up here and I'll just kind of cut that extra off. And then we'll come back to this area in a moment. I'll do the exact same thing on the other side. Okay, now I got to worry about the ends. Okay, and that is the trickiest part. I'll go back over here and I'll kind of complete this one and get it all the way up to the edge where it needs to be. Now, when I'm cutting a tight radius edge like this, I like to take it all in small cuts. So I'll do a little cut like that, then a little cut like that, and keep rotating it and doing small cuts, and pretty soon it'll be almost rounded, and then once we take some sandpaper or something to it to do our edges, it will be rounded. Then I'm going to have to do the same thing on the other end. The goal is to cut it until you know that there's no real corners there and it just looks kind of rounded. And there we go, now it's cut out. So now that we've got that cut out, the rest of it's just gonna be finishing our edges, and then we're gonna bend it to a bracelet shape and be done with it. So the first thing we need to use is an edge beveler of some sorts to take the corners, the sharp corners, off of the top and bottom of our cut. Now, I would use a pretty small edge beveler, like maybe a 0 or a 00, and go very slow, trying to get it in one whack. If you have to run it across there 2 or 3 times, then it makes your sanding and your burnishing a little bit more difficult. You're not trying to take a ton off, you're just trying to knock off those corners. There we go. Top side's done, now we gotta do the bottom side. So the next thing I'm going to do is I've got some 220 grit sandpaper here, and I'm just going to sand that exact same edge, making sure to get around the corners where it's beveled, but I don't want to accidentally scuff up my finished part of my leather. Okay? And if you notice, I'm doing all of this before I even burnish. Okay? It really helps to get a nice sanded edge before you burnish, and then your burnishing goes quicker, easier, and will look a lot better. Okay, now you can't see that edge probably close enough to know, but if you touch it, it feels burnished. It's very smooth, and it's already a decent edge, but of course we're gonna get it way better than just decent. But first I have to do the other side. Okay, so I've done both the long edges, but I still have to do these sharper corners, and they're a little bit more difficult. And there we go, and once again I'm going to hit it one more time with my edger. Sanding kind of showed me that I have still a sharp corner here. And again, you're sanding on the ends here, you're rotating it around and sanding it so that you don't have lots of little straight cuts, and you've just got one round, continuous end. Once I gave it a good sanding, I'm actually going to take a sponge with some water here, and I'm going to run that right down that edge, and then I'm going to resand it. And when I resand it, it's almost like it's burnished. It does create a very smooth edge. It's not shiny or glassy or anything like that, but it is very, very smooth, and that'll make my burnishing much quicker, easier, and better. So now that I've done all my sanding, I'm going to use a burnishing solution. This one happens to be Hagle's slicking solution. It's a great product. There's lots of burnishing solutions out there, and everybody's got their favorite. This is a really good one. I'm gonna get it on my dauber here and just wipe it right down the very edge of this project. And this is one of those you don't want to use too much. And then I'm just going to start burnishing with a piece of canvas. If you don't have a piece of canvas available to you, a wooden stick or a wooden burnisher, something like that work great. I've always been a fan of using canvas though. So I'm going to burnish it quite a bit here. I want to make sure that it's really good, and we may even look at it when we're done, and we may even resand it and reburnish it again. A lot of the time, if you do it a second time, you'll really get some great results. I see a lot of folks on social media and stuff like that, and folks will bring work into my shop to show me, and their edges look good, but they're just a couple of minutes away from having edges that look amazing. Great edges are almost an art form on their own. But there's that one. And it's pretty smooth and it looks good. We'll see as it dries if it kind of gets a consistent burnish down it. If not, I may sand it and redo it. But until then, we'll work on the other side. I do want to make sure I'm not getting this burnishing solution on the finished pieces, the front or back of my leather, because it will add some color there, and then I won't have a nice consistent color on my project. So just got to be careful with it and go slow. Great edges are a very, very small detail on projects, but they really, really matter. People just don't understand the difference between a project that does or doesn't have great edges until they see the two side by side, and then they get it pretty quick. Now that I've done the edges, the long edges here, I'm gonna take, and I'm just going to, for a second, kind of press down on those corners and do a little bit more burnish, and that'll help once again to round them and make them look more consistent. It's not gonna take a lot, just a little. All right, now I've just got to do my ends. And I find the ends are usually the hardest part to do. And I don't try to move my canvas around the end. I just hold my canvas and I rub the leather against the canvas instead of the canvas against the leather. It's very difficult to try to get the canvas to operate going around it so much. And after you're done burnishing your ends, you want to look again and make sure that they don't have any areas where you can tell that you don't have a consistent round cut on them. And if you do, then you still need to sand that area down a little bit and work on it just a little more, and you'll get it. So there you go. My burnishing is complete. My edges are completely smooth. One of the goals of your burnish is to make sure that you don't see that there's 2 layers of leather there. It looks like one solid piece. So the only thing left to do with this bracelet is to bend it. I'm not going to put any kind of finish on this because just like the one that I'm wearing, I want it to naturally patina. If you spill coffee on it, if you get stuck in the rain with it, whatever, it's just going to look better as it goes. At the same craft store that I found the bracelet blanks, I found this bracelet bender here. Okay, and this thing is extremely easy to use. You just take the end of your bracelet, and you've got to stick it in there. Sometimes it can't, your leather's going to be thicker than what this thing wants to hold, and that's okay. You just put your finger there and forcefully bend it around as you go. And there's no scientific way or rhyme or reason or whatever else to get this part done. It just has to fit a wrist well when it's done. So I do what I can with the bracelet bender, and then I kind of take it off that and do the rest by hand just to get done what I can. I do want to curl my ends really well. The more curled they are, then the more it'll stick on a wrist and it won't just fall off easily. But the good news is this can be bent and rebent 1,000 times as long as you're not damaging the metal inside. And there we go. So we just kind of make sure that it's symmetrical as we go. I've got a little bit of work to do here. And there we have it. Until the end user gets this and we kind of figure out what size wrist they'll have, we're finished here. This was a fun little project. It takes all of 30 minutes if you're hand sewing it and everything else. This is a very quick project. And again, it's a great way to turn a scrap of leather that you probably would have thrown away into a high-end article. This should, if you're selling this should bring a decent little bit of money for what it is. And they're pretty highly sought after. I've had a lot of folks in my shop ask about the one I wear and the 6 or 7 of them that I've got laying around that I made out of all kinds of other leathers. They're just laying around on my tables. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the project. I hope you learned something with it. And most of all, I hope you had fun.
Illume Connect is the place to connect with the world of leathercraft. Illume Magazine, Learn with Illume, and Illume Events, all of these outlets are a place to learn more and get involved in the leather crafting community. We hope to see you soon in print, online, or at one of our events.